Welcome to On the Record, Election 2016, presented by WENY News. Here's your host, Ross DiMattei.
Hello. Today I'll be sitting down with the candidates running to represent New York's 23rd Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives. Geographically, the district extends along the New York-Pennsylvania border from the shores of Lake Erie all the way to Tioga County and extending north of the Finger Lakes. Republican incumbent Tom Reed is being opposed by Democratic challenger John Plum. It's time now to put these candidates on the record. And I'm honored now to be joined now by Captain John Plum. You are running for the Congress seat available here in our district. It's an honor to have you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Ross. Really pleased to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Now, I'm going to start you off with an easy one. Why run for Congress?
So, thank you very much. Let me just introduce myself real quick. I'm a fourth-generation Western New Yorker. I grew up in a little town called Randolph. Went to Randolph High School. We had 56 kids in my graduating class. So, small town, just like all through our district. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of my service in the military. I've been in the military for over 22 years as a Navy submarine officer. And what we have in this country right now is a problem where people are frustrated because members of Congress, elected members, are no longer really representing our own constituents, our own districts, certainly not representing the southern tier. They're just looking out for special interests and rigging the system in their favor, and it's got to stop. It's got to stop if we're going to move this country forward, and I think I have an opportunity to do that, and that's why I feel like I need to be running.
Good introduction. Let's get right into the issues, if you don't mind. One of the things Americans are most frustrated about is the stalemate in Congress, the lack of bipartisanship on both sides, which is really resulting in not much getting done in Congress, not many laws being passed. What issues are you most willing to work with Republicans on to kind of make sure something does happen in Congress and laws are passed like they're supposed to be?
Absolutely. So let me just say, on my submarine, no one cared if you're a Republican or a Democrat or if you didn't vote at all. The whole point was if you're working for the team to get things done and keep people safe, then you were on the team and we were all working together. And that is really missing in Congress, like you just pointed out. I think there are a lot of things that could unify us. One of the problems we have is there's too much money in politics right now, and that is actually causing less and less bipartisanship as people get ripped farther and farther apart from the center. So I think I'd like to find an opportunity to work with anyone that wants to help reduce the amount of money in Congress. And for our rural areas, there are rural areas represented by Democrats and Republicans all across this country, and I think there's a lot of work we could do there, highlighting the challenges that rural areas face to regrow our economies, fight the opioid epidemic, and I think there's plenty of opportunity for people that want to put politics aside and get results done.
And you think both sides are willing to work to take the money out of politics? Because this is something that, at times has seemed one-sided. The Democrats sometimes more willing to do that than Republicans. Is that something that you feel you can work with Republicans to take the money out of politics and reverse some of those Supreme Court decisions that have allowed unlimited spending on campaigns?
So obviously reversing a Supreme Court decision is a lot of work, takes a lot of effort, but I do believe there are good people on both sides of the aisle, but they're being silenced or held hostage by the most extreme portions of the Congress.
Okay. Moving along, talking with voters, there's a lot of discussion surrounding the fact you've spent the past 2 decades either serving in the Navy, like you mentioned before, or working in Washington, D.C., while working for the Department of Defense under the Obama administration. Some have even questioned your commitment to some of the voters right here in the southern tier. What do you have to say about some of those allegations?
So first of all, Tom Reed says a lot of things. That seems to be his trademark, is saying a bunch of things and then going to D.C. and voting against the district. But let me just address that particular challenge. I was born and raised here. I'm planning to die and be buried here. And I have been taken away from this area by the United States Navy, and they could call me again. But no amount of bullying by a lousy member of Congress who would have so many integrity violations that the military wouldn't even let him stay is going to change that.
Are you planning to move here even if you aren't voting?
I plan to win, and I plan to stay.
Okay. Moving right along, we do have a viewer question. We took some questions from the viewers who wanted to ask you directly, and this one comes from Doug from Caton. He asks, no matter who wins the presidential election, the AHCA, American Healthcare Association, is going to be front and center again talking about healthcare. Mr. Plum, do you think the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, should be scrapped and we should start over with the healthcare because it's not working for a lot of Americans, millions of Americans paying high deductibles, and it's not working for them? Or do you think the system can just be tweaked and can still be salvaged?
So first of all, tweaked isn't the right word, I think. I know that the Affordable Care Act is not working as well as it should be for everyone, and I do think it should be improved, and I think there are plenty of opportunities to do so. I'm really disappointed that Congressman Reed and several other members of Congress have spent 63 opportunities where they could have tried to fix it, just trying to repeal it with no plan of their own. And that's the difference between just playing politics and trying to actually get results for people. Clearly the copays have become too high. Clearly some people can't really afford health care even when they have a plan, and that's a problem and we need to fix it. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that, but not if we keep sending the same people to Congress that are only looking out for the pharmaceutical industry and Wall Street.
Now, continuing on with that question, I think people like Bernie Sanders have brought up the idea of a public single-payer healthcare system. Would you go as far as to try and get all the money out of the healthcare industry and go to a single-payer system, or do you think the Obamacare system offering a public option and a private option is the better way to go?
Look, I think there's a lot of ways we could expand our current practices to try to make healthcare more affordable to more Americans with better patient outcomes. For instance, Medicare could be expanded to go lower and lower in age group, which sort of gets you towards a single-payer healthcare, but this is actually a pragmatic approach to getting more people covered with a reasonable program. I don't think there's any opportunity to just throw the whole baby out with the bathwater and start over without doing a lot of damage. And let's not forget, one thing the Affordable Care Act brought us that has been massively important is to get rid of these pre-existing condition clauses. If you break your arm when you're in 7th grade, you literally had healthcare companies that weren't going to cover you when you're 40 years old. It was like, oh, you broke your arm once, we don't cover anything about your arm. That's outrageous. And by getting rid of that problem, we've allowed people to move in jobs and to actually get operations or healthcare they never could have afforded before.
Do you think Obamacare has done more good than harm for the American people?
I think it has done some good, and I think there is more good to be done, and we can't get better results if you still have an entire set of people in Congress who thinks the only value here is to take a political cheap shot as opposed to actually getting results for people.
Okay. We mentioned the presidential election. We did a little research. It was kind of, hard to find, but have you gone on record in supporting Hillary Clinton for president?
So yes, I have said, and I will tell you again, I will vote for Hillary Clinton for president. That's just true. I'm not going around campaigning for her. I'm certainly not flying around the country like Tom Reed is for his candidate. And I think the point of a good member of Congress is to work here in the district on results for this district and not pretend that there's something else on the other end of the rainbow if you keep following up along with your presidential candidate.
So I think we've heard stronger endorsements, from other candidates of Secretary Clinton for president. Are there things you disagree with Hillary Clinton on, on the issues?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, let's be very clear. I think her use of that email server was a real mistake, and it's really clouded this election, and she should have been more careful. So that's one. The second thing is, there are sometimes rumblings about guns and Hillary Clinton. I'm a proud supporter of the Second Amendment. I'm a hunter myself and a firearms owner, and I believe and know that responsible gun owners just want to be left alone, but there's still room that we could work together to actually find ways to reduce gun violence. And also I will just say for both parties, I don't think either has done enough for veterans, certainly not rural veterans, and I will be a proud champion of the problems of rural veterans and trying to push forward solutions for our rural areas.
And you brought up gun violence and the Second Amendment, so let's talk more about that.
Sure.
Because I think you're kind of a rare breed in that you are a military veteran, proudly served our Navy, but you're also running as a Democrat, which we don't see a ton of. What is your stance on the Second Amendment? Do you believe in universal background checks for all gun sales across the board and closing those gun show loopholes that have been brought up so much, in the wake of mass murder in certain cases across the country?
Yeah, so first of all, I am a proud United States Navy officer, and I would contest your thought that that is a rare bird for someone to be a Democrat in the military. There are Democrats and Republicans and people of no party all throughout the military, and like I said before, we all work together and put politics aside to get results. For myself, I am a hunter. I do own weapons, and I am a proud defender of the Second Amendment. And yes, of course, people have the right to own weapons, but I do think universal background checks, as you said, I would say closing the gun show loopholes is important, and making sure that our background checks actually work. Because right now, there's this old phrase, garbage in, garbage out. If the information in the background check search isn't any good, just going through a background check isn't going to stop someone that shouldn't have a weapon, for instance, a suspected terrorist.
Okay, and just going off that, I mean, it sounds like, clearly you're in support of universal background checks. How far are you willing to go, are you willing to, there have been proposals from other Democrats about maybe banning high-capacity magazines,
No.
you're not in support of that.
No, I think that the people that propose these things may have their heart in the right place, but they don't actually understand how people that actually own weapons operate or think. People build different parts for their own weapons. They trade ideas, just like you might work on cars. People work on weapons, and there's just a lot there that people are just responsible and they want to work and engineer their own systems. And I think there's no situation where banning a particular thing that you can make in your backyard is going to solve a problem. But we could try to keep weapons out of the hands of people that we've already agreed shouldn't have them, right? People that have committed domestic violence felonies are not allowed to have weapons, right? So let's make sure that they don't, and let's make sure that our background checks are populated with that. And let's also be clear about something else. The background check is very simple. It takes very little time. You just put in a few pieces of information, it runs a database, it checks you out. If everything's fine, it's done in a few minutes.
Okay, and I want to talk about veterans for a second. Obviously, that's something near and dear to your heart, but our country has had issues with the Veterans Affairs and
no kidding.
The whole system. Do you have a plan in place that you think? Do you have experience that you feel like you can bring to that issue to make the system work better and eliminate some of those wait times at the VA?
Absolutely, and the problems that the VA has been exposed to the rest of the country over the last couple of years are just absolutely tragic. And there's a lot of things that can be done to improve it. The first thing that I want to point out, though, is a good member of Congress continues to shine the spotlight on things and make sure that things are working as we expect. Because no matter what happens, if you were to fix the entire VA tomorrow and it was working perfectly, within a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, things would start to go off the rails unless good members of Congress, whose job in the Constitution is to provide oversight of the executive branch, continue to do their job and provide that oversight. So that's one. The other thing I would just say is until the VA can get to the point where the wait times are very low and back to where they should be, clearly people should be able to access private health care. We've got a problem here in rural areas where there's this 40-mile handcuff rule that prevents veterans from really getting the care they need if they're near a clinic, even if it doesn't provide the stuff they need. And so we have to find a way to make sure our rural veterans are taken care of too.
What was your reaction when you saw the report that our own government has spent billions of dollars trying to fix the VA, and in fact, some of the it hasn't really improved the system very much. In fact, in some cases, the reports have shown that it's backfired and actually made the situation worse. What can the government do differently?
So the VA has a structural problem where it's a bunch of fiefdoms running around on their own kind of authority, and then trying to get a top-down solution set becomes very hard. It's very different than the military, which is used to taking orders from the top and trickling them down. And so part of it is, I think, over the long term, we need to get the VA back to a point where each VA hospital is obeying a similar set of regulations and has a way to absorb new regulations and promulgate them. That's hard to do, right? That's a long-term thing. You can't flip a switch. I will say this, in this area, if someone is in the VA system, once you successfully get into it, people are pretty pleased with their health care. They might have some complaints here and there, but overall, once you're in the system, it's good. The problem is how hard is it to get into the system? And just as a really good example, if you have a depression problem or a PTSD problem and you're trying to get into the system, that is the hardest, to get through all of that bureaucracy that we've put in place. And we need to make sure that people that are really vulnerable right now are not being turned away at the door because you don't have this form or you didn't bring this ID. We need to have a much better system that welcomes veterans in when they're at their most vulnerable to make sure that we don't cause them more harm.
All right, we do have to take a quick break, but on the other side, we have more on the issues with John Plum. We're going to talk about national security and all that comes with that, so stay tuned. And joining me, Navy Captain John Plum. You're running for Congress this year. How's the campaign going so far?
It's going great. Thanks for asking, but we're in the final stretch right now, and just increasing number of people helping out, doing phone banks, knocking on doors, getting our name out there. I'm really pleased, and it's really good to see so many people working for change in the district.
Awesome. Let's put you back on the record here and get back to the issues at hand. And
all right.
One of the biggest issues facing not only the southern tier, the entire country, which is the opioid and heroin epidemic. I know you just unveiled a new plan. Can you tell me how it differs from how the country currently handles this epidemic? Because clearly, people are dying every day, and it's not working for us right now.
That's right. We've got a huge problem in this country with opioids, and including painkillers, right? Prescription painkillers, and then often leads to heroin. And we've got overdose deaths, and our rural communities are actually getting hurt at a far worse rate. You may not know this, but rural areas, 45% higher death rate from overdoses than urban areas.
Wow.
So this is a mess. We are the only industrialized nation with this level of problem, the only one that prescribes this many opioids, and the only one with this kind of addiction and overdose problem. And we are fundamentally doing pain management wrong in the United States of America. We are prescribing far too many painkillers. Last year, 259 million bottles of pills. That's more than one for every single adult in America. And the cold hard fact is, for some percentage of people, just receiving one of those bottles could end up in a lifetime of addiction because some people are genetically predisposed. And we need to find a way where we don't always have to use painkillers, and opioid painkillers in particular, if someone is in pain. Some people need it, but there are other alternative forms. Ibuprofen comes to mind, physical therapy comes to mind, and people should know the risks before they have to decide which type of pain medication to take, because we've really got to crack down on this problem. And it's very difficult to do when you have members of Congress that are bought and paid for by the pharmaceutical industry, frankly, such as Tom Reed.
Do you have a specific proposal that will cut down on how many painkillers are being prescribed, by doctors that you can pass, in
Absolutely.
Congress?
I do. I've got a couple of proposals. One proposal would be to remove the amount of pain a patient is feeling from a patient satisfaction survey, because right now you literally have surveys that are built into the system where a hospital or healthcare provider might end up getting paid more and at a better compensation rate if the customer or the client is experiencing less pain. And the problem is that might just give you a reason to just prescribe opioids to try to get past that. I'm not saying it happens everywhere, but it does happen, and that's part of the problem. The second thing is we really do need to focus on alternatives. One, we need to develop through research some really strong non-opioid painkillers. And two, we need to look at what places do in Europe, for example, where they don't have this problem because they don't prescribe as many of these drugs. And I think getting the pharmaceutical industry off of television and getting them out of marketing directly to doctors and to consumers would help.
And you mentioned the next step, which a lot of times is going to heroin on the street. A lot of lawmakers have treated heroin use as a criminal justice issue and tried to increase the penalties. We've seen kind of with the war on drugs in the past that hasn't always been the best solution. Do you view it as a criminal justice issue that we're not prosecuting dealers and users enough, or do you view it more as a public health crisis?
Mainly it's a public health crisis. Obviously we need to still try to put pressure on large supply chains, but users are dealers and dealers are users down at the street level, and it's really important to understand that. So if you have a proposal that proposes to put a dealer in jail or send them to the death chair, to the electric chair, that is going to reduce the number of people who are even going to report my friend just overdosed because they don't want to get arrested at the same time, and that's going to lead to more deaths. And also it's not going to solve the fundamental problem. There's this replacement problem. You take one low-level dealer off the street, another one just shows up. And so what we need to do is go after treatment, and I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that, and we're missing it. One thing, for example, if you show up at the hospital or the police station and say, I've got a problem, I really need help, you should never be turned away because you don't have the right insurance card. You should never be turned away because you don't have, you're not displaying all of the symptoms of a particular addict. I think we need to get past that and make sure there's a space to take people in when they know they need help before they overdose and die. We also need to push on drugs for combating this epidemic, such as Vivitrol, which is a long-term injection, and other opportunities that work better for rural areas so we don't want people driving to a city every day to get a treatment.
Let's switch gears now and talk about national defense, something that you've spent much of your life in that sector. Yeah, your whole life. First I want to talk about Ithaca. They were recently, or they're on the verge, of trying to bring Syrian refugees into the country. Now, this has obviously been a hotly debated topic, across the country. Many governors have come out and said we should close the borders to Syrian refugees. Obviously, it's a hotbed for where ISIS is headquartered, and also where a lot of terroristic ideas come from. What's your stance on bringing Syrian refugees to the United States? Do you believe we should be bringing Syrian refugees here?
So first of all, let's just be very clear. People going around throwing cold water on the idea about Syrian refugees coming to America, and people going around using race and religion as a reason to keep people out, are taking political cheap shots at the expense of American leadership. There are people from different churches and different faiths all across this district that are working to bring Syrian refugees in. They are the most vetted form of immigrants in the entire world, both by the UN and by the United States and by our counterterrorism centers. Yes, we should make sure we're taking every possible look, including on social media, to make sure that the people coming in are safe. But the fact is, the refugee problem in Syria is a humanitarian crisis, and people of faith understand that, and we need to bring people in and step up with other world leaders to make sure that we are demonstrating those principles that America is founded on, which we welcome people.
Do you are you concerned at all about the potential for radicalization or radical terrorists coming in with those Syrian refugees and putting our American citizens at risk?
Look, of course it's a concern, but let's also look at what's been going on in this country. None of the radical domestic terror attacks that we've witnessed have come from Syrian refugees, right? So radicalization is totally separate from this refugee question, right? Refugees are trying to flee their government and flee getting bombed by the Russians or the Syrians or ISIS or rebels or whoever is trying to kill them right now, and find a place where they can be safe. We do have a problem with radicalization, including lone wolf radicalization in your basement. That's why in my proposal to fight ISIS, I have laid out a series of steps I think we should be taking, including going after those cyber recruiting tools that ISIS uses to try to radicalize people. And I don't think you should be able to just get online and find out kind of this propaganda piece about how to cut people's heads off or build bombs or any of these terrible things that might set people in the wrong path. I think this is a war. We need to treat it like a war, and we need to go after those outlets.
So you're talking about censoring websites that permeate that kind of propaganda?
I think we can work together with internet providers. We can work together with Google and Facebook to try to reduce the amount of violent extremism that comes through. And I also think there are other methods the United States government can use if it comes to that.
Okay, let's talk about taking the fight, to the Middle East and trying to destroy ISIS as we know it. Do you think it's possible to permanently destroy ISIS as a whole, and how would you go about doing it?
So yes, I do think it's possible. That does not mean that some other threat to the country won't emerge, but let's look at what we did with Al-Qaeda. Right? Currently, the United States Department of Defense is operating under an authorization to use military force that was passed by the Congress in 2001 to fight Al-Qaeda. We have dismantled Al-Qaeda. Effectively, they are gone. We have killed their leadership over and over and over. Now, what has happened, ISIS has sort of taken its place as a primary threat. Congress, cowards that they are, has refused to authorize a new version of the authorization for use of military force against ISIS. So they don't have the right oversight, they don't have the right executive authority in place, and so we've got a real problem where Congress isn't even part of the national security dialogue or solution because it's so much easier and convenient to just point fingers. I think we need to go ruthlessly and effectively after the top leadership. We need to kill and capture them. At the same time, we need to pull up their recruiting vehicles and their sources of power by their roots, get rid of their financing, get rid of their arms supply, and like I said, get after the recruiting.
Do you support putting boots on the ground? Is that part of your plan?
So the problem with the term boots on the ground is it gets thrown around a lot and people don't know what it means. So if you mean, do I want
American
an invading
troops.
army? Well, be careful now. An invading army, no. But American troops are there right now in Syria and in other parts of the Middle East, advising, spotting, and trying to find things out, right? So if you're talking about 10 troops or 20 troops or 100 troops with special forces doing some type of advising and making sure we can find the enemy and kill them, I'm fine with that. If you're talking about invading like we did in Iraq, that's a terrible idea, and we should not do that. So we just be careful how we use the term because zero is not the answer.
What about Assad? Do you think, he's obviously the president of Syria. Do you, he's committed terrible crimes in that country. But we saw, are you worried about, what's your stance on Assad? Do you support, leaving him in power and trying to maintain what stability is left in the Middle East? Or do you think he's a leader that needs to be taken out?
So, first of all, you're talking about right now, right? Because we have been responsible partially for this problem in Syria, and Assad is obviously just a horrible human being. He is certainly guilty of multiple war crimes, but right now it's Assad and Russia taking on rebels, some of which are ISIS, some of which are rebels that we were trying to support, and many of which the collateral damage is civilians in Aleppo. So I think that our progress should be focused relentlessly on going after ISIS. And if we had done that, we never would have tried to get rid of Assad. We would just go after ISIS leadership. And it's very tough to talk about Syria right now in a way that makes a coherent path forward, because if we talk about this in 1 week, Ross, it's going to be different. Mm-hmm. And so what should we do? I think we should focus on ISIS, and boy, Assad's a tough cookie. He's a terrible, terrible human being, but at the same time, if we could reduce the amount of violence, I think it'd be worth keeping him in.
All right, Captain Plum, just a couple minutes left. I want to talk about jobs. It's obviously a huge issue, to hear, especially here in the Southern Tier, because statistics have shown, of all the regions in New York State, here in the Southern Tier is really the only region that lost jobs last year. Do you have a plan that could help bring more jobs to the Southern Tier at the congressional level?
I absolutely do. I've put that on my website, www.johnplumforcongress.com, right? Plum with a B. And I will say one of the problems we have in the Southern Tier is that our member of Congress, Tom Reed, is not really championing this district at all, and he keeps selling us out to bigger interests. Let me give you just a basic example. He has voted for every single free trade deal he has ever seen in any form. We're in a rural manufacturing belt, especially the I-86 corridor along the Southern Tier. Any good economics professor knows that free trade deals that disproportionately hurt fragile manufacturing areas. That is what the Southern Tier is. These free trade deals are bad for our district, and no responsible member of Congress should have supported them. That includes the TPP, which I have been against since I announced my race, and this is a real problem. So that's one. That's how you protect the jobs you have. Growing the jobs we need. We should be pushing on renewable energy. We should be pushing on it as hard as possible. We have a problem in the Congress where members of Congress are going up the bat for big oil time and again, and that is preventing the United States of America from being the global leader on producing renewable energy and clean energy technology. This corridor has the sun, we have the wind, we have the land, we have the workforce, and let's go. But the problem is we've got to get some of these worst members of Congress out so we can move forward.
Now, I think one counterpoint is, the shale that's in this area. Fracking could be a very, beneficial thing for business in this area. Obviously, there's a ban on that here in New York State. Do you support that ban, or would you be open to the idea of lifting the ban on fracking if it meant better things for business in this area?
So I have said many times before, and I'll say again, I do support the governor's ban. I do think that is now in the past, and frankly, I think the problem the Southern Tier often has is trying to get on the last wave. Let's get on the current wave. And the current wave for energy in the world is renewable energy. It is the fastest growing source of energy supply for the next 25 years, already investing in hundreds of billions of dollars every year. Let's be part of a sustainable way to grow our economy and quit trying to fight the last battle.
Finally, education. I want to talk about the Democratic nominee for president, Hillary Clinton, has proposed free college tuition in state, just tuition only. Is that an idea that you support, and how would we pay for that?
So I actually don't quite support that level because I don't know how it would be paid for. What I do support is the idea of making sure that our students, when they graduate, are not saddled with an outrageous amount of debt that they can't afford to pay off. And the easiest and most straightforward way I have proposed to fix this is making sure you can finance and refinance your college debt at a competitive rate. Not at some artificially high rate to make sure you can pay it off. And the second thing, and I think this might be the most valuable, is to make sure that you can pay your college debt off as a function of your salary. And that would literally change an entire generation about what they might choose for a job. Because right now, you might not even be able to take the job you want because it won't pay enough to pay off your college debt. You might not be able to stay home here in the Southern Tier where our wages are depressed to pay off your college debt. So if you had a way where it was just a function of a percentage of your salary, then you could take a low job, a high-paying job, do something you want, the whole country will benefit.
Navy Captain John Plum, I want to thank you for the time. Good luck in the election.
Thanks.
And we are going to take a quick break. Thanks for going on the record with us.
Absolutely.
But coming up, we do have Congressman Tom Reed. He's going to go on the record with us. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to On the Record, Election 2016, where we are asking your local candidates about the issues that matter to you. And I am here with current Congressman Tom Reed. You're up for re-election in November. How's the campaign been going for you?
Well, first, thanks for having us on, Ross.
Of course.
And the campaign's going well. I mean, we're covering the district, and the support's been overwhelming, and we're just humbled by all the support and all the volunteers that are coming out to help us out.
That's awesome. Now, I do want to get right into the issues. It is on the record, so I want to ask you, first and foremost about Donald Trump. I mean, that's really what so many people are talking about, and he's had kind of an iffy go of it here at times. He insulted Mexican immigrants. He most recently was heard bragging about sexually assaulting women, but you've stood by him and endorsed him even today. What would it take for you to not endorse him anymore?
Well, I think Donald Trump brings us the best chance for change in Washington, D.C. To me, he's a disruptor. He wants to change the status quo. And when you have a choice, and that's what we have a choice in Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump as our nominee. And to me, Donald Trump is more aligned with my philosophy, warts and everything that he brings to the table. And when you talk about things like the Supreme Court and this president being able to impact the country for 25 to 40 years down the road, it's critical that we get the right philosophy in the White House in order to get things taken care of, like the Supreme Court. So with things that he obviously, like with warts and all, we call out the rhetoric we disagree with. We keep our independent mind, and we've called out his comments when need to be. But at the end of the day, when you're choosing between these two, to me, Donald Trump is the best for America's future.
Was there ever a point where you considered, taking back your endorsement of Mr. Trump?
Well, you always obviously reserve the right to do anything in the future, depending on what comes out. But when you're looking at the choice, Hillary Clinton, just to me, is going to be the establishment, is going to be the status quo. And my opponent, who supports Hillary Clinton, carries that type of philosophy to the table. And so that's part of the contrast, I think, also that's on display in this election for us. And as we go forward, we'll call out any rhetoric that we have to do so and hold him accountable. And we try to use our position to positively influence the campaign to focus on what really should be focused on. And that's the issues of the American people, things like job. And that's another thing Donald Trump brings to the table, that private sector background of creating a strong, vibrant economy. And I think he's in the best position to do that.
Okay. I want to talk about, your terms and your service to the community. You've served, correct me if I'm wrong, as representative for 6 years now, since 2010?
I just finished my sixth term.
Okay.
Or 6th year.
And during that time, congressional approval ratings amongst Americans have been at an all-time low. I mean, at one point it was below 10% of Americans approving of the job Congress is doing. Do you feel that you have positively contributed to fighting against the negative job approval of Congress?
Well, I'll put our record up out there, as we always do. We've done over 200 plus town halls. We're always out there in the district doing roundtables, listening to people. So we'll put our record and our record of representing the area up against anyone. And when you look at national polls, that's not what drives me. What drives me, and I come back and forth every week. My wife and kids live here in Corning, in our backyard. This is home. And what I try to do is just represent the people the way that I feel a true elected official should. And that should be part of the community, be there, and let the national polls take care of themselves. And from my perspective, the support we've been receiving, I think, vindicates how we approach the job. And that's why we're asking, because the job's not done, asking for support for another term in order to bring the voice of the 23rd Congressional District to D.C. rather than try to pontificate and have a ivory tower type of approach that so many members commit themselves to.
But I think some of the poor approval ratings have been a little bit driven by the fact that Congress time and time again fails to pass legislation because of the lack of bipartisanship. Do you feel like you have been able to work with Democrats and Republicans equally to pass legislation during your time?
I do, and I think the best example I could offer you, Ross, is my record. When I worked with Joe Kennedy of the Kennedy family out of Massachusetts, and we got our advanced manufacturing bill, he and I came together, drafted it, worked with Democrat and Republican partners in the Senate, and got it actually signed into law. And that advanced manufacturing bill is to promote 21st century manufacturing. And we're seeing the results of it right here in our district. With a $600 million investment that's going to go for the Advanced Manufacturing Center of the region in the area of photonics. That is a game changer. That is producing jobs of today and tomorrow right here in our backyard with cutting edge technology and making sure that we have the workforce being developed to serve that. And so, that is an example. That's not talking the talk, but walking the walk. And I also spend, I think it comes from my background being the youngest of 12, having 8 older sisters and 3 older brothers. You just have to always be in a position, Mom taught us, to work together. Because at the end of the day, we're all on the same team. And as you can imagine, we're never going to agree 100% with 717,000 people, nor could I agree 100% with 11 older brothers and sisters. But that's why we engage in the conversation. That's why we're co-chair of the No Labels group, which is a bipartisan group where it really is the only fundamental group in D.C. where we get together on a regular basis to talk about policy, to talk about solutions and implement solutions. No budget, no pay was an example that got to the finish line where we were the people that created that proposal. And so there's examples out there. And as we continue to go forward, we're going to look for opportunities. Like we just did a highway bill. First time in decades that we had a multi-year, 5-year bill put together. It was a bipartisan bill that we got to the finish line. So there have been successes. Do I want more of it? Of course I do. And I share the frustration and the sometimes anger that I hear at town halls about that gridlock in Washington. But we try to do our part, not be a bomb thrower, be a problem solver.
Now, I want to talk about education. You have been a very vocal critic of Common Core. if the standards are scrapped, how do you propose we monitor the progress of students and teachers? Because that's kind of been the barrier of monitoring their progress and making sure all parts of the country are, in line with certain educational standards. So how do we progress that and make sure that, we're competing on a global level with students in other countries? Because we've kind of fallen behind here in the past decade or so.
Well, and I think you start by recognizing that just spending money, because we have fallen behind on the world stage, but we are one of the highest investors in education, yet we don't get the results. And so your question about accountability, I believe, is a very good question. When it comes to Common Core, that one-size-fits-all from Washington policy that we're against and we have fought against and have had success in order to defend parental rights and children's rights not to be subject to those testing requirements that you referenced. But what we need is, I think, more of a local government-driven, local school boards, local parents, local administrators. And how you do the accountability, in my opinion, is you go to them each and every year. It's going to take a lot of work. You go to the local school board, you go to the local teacher and say, how do we measure success for this year when it comes to getting our kids the best education from day one to the end of the school year? And then have a collaborative effort, put those standards down, and then hold the organizations, the school districts, the administrators, the teachers, the parents to those standards at the end of the year. These are bottom-up type of driven standards that I think reflect the needs of the community. Because I think at the end of the day, when it comes to education, you ask a teacher, you ask a parent, you ask an administrator, what's their motivating factor? Is to give their kids, those young men and women that are in their classes, the best education, because that's the best opportunity they're going to have to move forward in life. And I think that is, respect that commitment and let them set the standards, but we just hold them accountable to that.
So you trust those local school districts and local governments enough to kind of set their own standards, and you think that will drive people to really innovate in the education department to the point where we are competitive on a global level?
I do, because the intent that I find with teachers, that I find with parents, with administrators, is they want their schools to be the best performing schools there. And you can go inner city, you can go urban setting, you can go rural setting. I see it across the country, I see it across the district. And so I think what you need is that it takes a lot of work. I'm not going to deny that. But it's a hand-to-hand, local based determination that's really driving the standards up by having folks be held accountable to their own standards and making sure, I think at the end of the day, you'll have a better outcome.
Okay, I want to switch gears here and talk about energy, because I was reading on your website that you've called for kind of an, as you described it, an all-of-the-above approach, talking about natural gas and oil, as well as exploring renewable wind and solar energy. So if you kind of had to weigh the two options, dirty energy, if you will, I mean, in terms of drilling for gas and oil, as opposed to trying to innovate and go towards a cleaner, more renewable energy source here in our country, what do you think is more important to focus on?
Oh, I think they're all important. I think an all of the above strategy means that we truly are not picking winners and losers. What we are doing is advocating for each energy source to meet the energy portfolio demands for America's energy needs. And by that, what I mean is making sure that we need to recognize that domestic oil, domestic natural gas is part of our energy portfolio. Now, I do believe in the yes we can attitude. If there's a problem, we in America don't say, no, we can't do it, we can't overcome it, it's too hard. What we do is identify the problem and we solve it. I mean, we put men on the moon, for Pete's sakes. We can do this safely and responsibly. But then we also have to make sure that we recognize that natural gas and oil is a finite resource of energy. And what we need to make sure is that alternatives and renewables are just as equally important as that domestic source of natural gas and oil. And so that's why we have not just talked the talk, we've walked the walk in regards to our recognition as being the solar champion in the House on the Republican side, being on the tax code writing committee in Washington. I've advocated for the investment tax credit, production tax credit. Those are tax policies that allow our alternatives, such as wind and solar, to exist and to be able to flourish. When you see things like Solar City, when I go on a grape grower's field in Chautauqua County and see small wind distribution centers coming up, I'm excited because we've been part of that. And so that's what we got to promote, and that's what we have to move forward with.
Do you envision an energy grid at some point that is entirely renewable and clean? Because like you mentioned, those resources, natural gas and oil, are finite, and there are some risks that come with drilling for those here on our soil. So do you envision a grid that is all renewable? And if so, when do you see that being a possibility?
Yeah. I have a lot of hope and optimism that we are going to have a grid that can be completely renewable. That's why I also stand for investments such as what we see just outside the district at University of Rochester with the great research that's being done in the laser lab at University of Rochester with laser fusion. So there's always an opportunity. That's why I believe in the American can-do attitude, the yes we can attitude, because we innovate. We come up with those inventions that are going to lead us to those to that situation. When that occurs, I hope sooner rather than later. Because when we talk about this too, it's not just the jobs that are associated with, those are critical and they're critically important. When you see things like Solar City and other things going forward in near our district, you also have to look at this from a national security perspective. And that's why also the domestic oil and natural gas is critical, because if we did not secure those sources of energy today, I guarantee you, our men and women in the military would be shedding American blood in the Middle East in order for us to have the energy we need to keep our cars running and our lights on. To me, this is a national security question also, and it's also something that not only impacts the economy, but impacts our future growth in a big time way.
Okay, I want to talk about something that is troubling to many Americans, and that is health care. I know you've been very critical of Obamacare, but it does provide health care to millions. So are you in favor of totally scrapping it and starting over? Are you in favor of a public health option at all?
Yeah. When it comes to Obamacare, I think this is a clear contrast between my opponent and myself. You know, he supports it. I do not. I believe we need to repeal it and replace it. Now, we do have some common ground that we can move to replacement on because the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, did a lot in regards to insurance reforms and insurance mandate from the government. And so things like pre-existing condition, removing that from calculation, things like having your children on your parents' policy for up to the age of 26, lifetime caps. I think we can find common ground and bring those insurance
reforms. You agree with those policies?
I do, and bring those forward in the replacement package. Where I think we also need to go in a big-time way, which the Affordable Care Act hasn't gone as far as I would like, is how are we going to bring, not insurance, because what the Affordable Care Act did is mandate insurance coverage to try to take care of the uninsured. But by doing that, they've driven the cost of health care up. That's why we're seeing premium increases of 25%, and just like we did last week. So if we can get to the health care cost question, and that is not a simple 30-second response solution. It's bigger than that. And we have some ideas. And what I would always like to do in the healthcare cost question is empower individuals and doctors as opposed to insurance carriers and government bureaucrats. And if we come at it from that perspective, then we can move the needle and get these healthcare costs under control.
Okay, hold that thought because I want to get more of your ideas on what kind of direction we're going to go in. But we do have to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We have more Congressman Tom Reed coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back to On the Record, Election 2016. I'm here with Congressman Tom Reed, and we were just finishing up kind of talking about healthcare and how you were in favor of repealing Obamacare. I want to know what the other option is going forward. Are you in favor of a public option, and what differences would you make?
Yeah, a public option I'm not supportive of. A lot of folks who advocate for that are talking about single payer for everyone, single payer healthcare. To me, that's more government control, government mandate. And as we deal with the healthcare cost equation, I really try to keep it as simple as this, so people understand where I'm coming from. You have two tools primarily available to you. You have government mandate, government regulation, government legislative approach. That's the single payer, Affordable Care Act, Obamacare approach. I don't subscribe to that philosophy. I subscribe to the market pressure, human nature, individual and doctor-driven solutions that we're advocating for, because then you start changing behavior. You start changing the cost curves by just the regular marketplace type of situation. And I concede that not all healthcare is a marketplace. If you're having a heart attack and you're in the back of an ambulance, we're not talking about a marketplace there. But that's a relatively small section of our healthcare dollar that goes out the door in regards to most of the healthcare is something else. It's something different. And so what I would be advocating for are things like we have to get the waste, fraud, and abuse out of the system. I support tort reform. I believe that's a reasonable step forward. That goes a long way to get the defensive medicine under control. But I do believe that you have other tools that you got to use. You got to use things like allowing insurance shopping across state lines, allowing more transparency in the healthcare transaction, making sure people know how much things really do cost. And because you ask that question, and I've asked it of doctors, and my doctors hate when I ask the question, but they're onto it now. You know, how much does this cost me to come into here? And they're like, oh, that's a $20 copay, $50 copay. That's not what I'm talking about. Knowing the true cost. And then if you ask the doctors, they don't even know. They're just like, oh, I'll talk to the administrator, talk to the people up front. They don't know. More transparency, more accountability. And we need to make sure one other tool is put into the arsenal, and that is the end-of-life question. Because all the reports that I've read and studied on this, the last 6 months of our lives, we are spending something like 60 to 70% of our healthcare dollars, significant amount of our healthcare dollar. And so, I'm a big fan of hospice, palliative care. I do a lot of work on that front. Let's have this end-of-life conversation much sooner, so we don't end up driving down quality of life at the same time that the quantity of dollars going out the door is significant when it comes to end-of-life care. And so that is part of the ideas that we're bringing to the table.
Let me just play devil's advocate for 1 second, because if I'm hearing you correctly, you're in favor of going back to what was an entirely privatized healthcare system. And under that system, we had millions of Americans without healthcare at all. And Obamacare, as expensive as it is, and I don't think there's any denying that people are paying way more in premiums than they should be. But what about those millions of people that couldn't afford health care at all under that system?
No, that's different. What I am not defending going back to the status quo, because what you're talking about is the insurance marketplace. What I'm really talking about is a whole new healthcare delivery culture in America, where actually healthcare itself, not just insurance, are exposed to the market pressure. And the Obamacare market was more about insurance type of market. I want to open up the healthcare transaction, the healthcare market, so that individuals and doctors are more truly engaged in the conversation. And you have things, you got some carriers. Carriers are going to be part of this because they administer the healthcare system to a degree. You got carriers that are doing some cutting edge things. I mean, what we have seen in studies is Americans are more driven by their pocketbook than often their health. And by that, what I mean is I think we've all been there. When we're having that emergency situation.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. When we're having that emergency situation, then we're always like, oh, I'll never smoke another cigarette again. I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to work out 6 times a week and I'm going to be good. And then the emergency goes through and we forget about it. We go back to the old habits. But we're seeing things like rewarding people for taking their medicine, rewarding people for doing their follow-up. With a rebate check or a direct check, or even some things like a gift certificate at the local store.
Yeah.
That drives human behavior. That type of thing, you have a better quality outcome because you got better medical adherence, better doctor care, and you're also getting a little bit more money in your pocket. I think that's a win-win, and that can drive these costs down.
Sure. I want to talk about something that's kind of near and dear to this area and many Americans, and that's the Second Amendment. I know it's kind of come under fire with some of the proposed regulations in terms of universal background checks, closing the gun show loophole. You're a gun owner, correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've been raised here in the Southern Tier.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's your stance? Do you support any of those background checks that we've seen polls that, widely supported by Americans, but nothing's gotten done in Congress so far?
Well, I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment. I stand by the Second Amendment. It is a constitutionally guaranteed individual fundamental freedom. And so I want to make sure we're clear on that. And, I have had the NRA endorsement and proud to receive the NRA endorsement. If we can get to this issue by really going after what I think we all share is the concern and care for the victims of gun violence. And so how do you move the needle in order to address that? And to me, I would say, let's consider some areas like mental health. Let's consider things like convicted felons losing their gun rights because they've shown that they have abused that constitutional freedom. To me, that makes a lot of sense because you look at the studies, people in the inner city, for example, are engaging in gun violence. Most of them have had a criminal record. They're dealing drugs. They're into drug activity. So we can work there, and I'm open to that. But when you talk about just universal restrictions on our freedoms and our rights as gun holders and gun owners in America, that to me is a slippery slope that I don't support.
So, I mean, I want to clarify because it sounds like you were in favor of background checks to try and determine who might have mental health issues or a criminal background. But with things like the gun show loophole where, you can sell without a background check at a gun show, doesn't that allow for holes in the system to allow people with those problems to get a gun?
I'm always open to a conversation. If there's a better way to do this, and we have supported things like the NICS improvement resources for the NICS background check, making it more effective and efficient, and making sure that people that potentially are bureaucratically lost in that system, because right now, like you take the no-fly, no-buy list argument that's going around. No one in Congress, I don't support having terrorists get weapons, buying guns. And you have hundreds of people that don't even know they're on that system. You got reporters that are in there erroneously. So if we're going to talk about improving the system, I'm open to improving that and make sure the bad guys don't have access to the guns, the people that have demonstrated and that they have abused their constitutional freedoms, then we can find some common ground there. But when it comes to the Second Amendment, I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment, and the approach that a lot of folks have been taking is just to ban the weapon completely. And to me, that's just a complete infringement on our Second Amendment rights.
Fair enough. I want to talk about a recent piece of legislation that you proposed, a bill talking about opioids and proposing the death penalty for dealers who have been found guilty of lacing their opioids with fentanyl, which will lead to an overdose. We've seen that time and time again. But critics have said that that is merely an extension of kind of that 1980s war on drugs thinking. I want to give you a chance to kind of defend that bill.
Yeah, we have received the criticism there on the death penalty proposal that we're putting here. But let's just be clear. When it comes to the heroin crisis, and I've had roundtables across the district, I've held mothers, fathers in my arms who have had their sons and daughters die as a result of their first use of heroin, and finding them in their beds. I mean, it's horrific. And so when we're talking about our proposal on the death penalty, we're not talking about this being the magic bullet. It is not. In order to address this crisis, you need to have education and awareness, prevention, if you would. You need to make sure that the people that are in throes of addiction have access to treatment. And then also you got to make sure that our law enforcement, though, is a component of it. And what our proposal, bringing the death penalty and life imprisonment into the mix is to go after the worst of the worst. It's 100 grams of heroin laced with fentanyl or similar substances. Some of these substances are like, Ross, are like cow tranquilizers, horse tranquilizers, and these guys are putting it in there knowingly. And if you're engaging in that risk where you're killing our kids on the first dose, I'm going to give law enforcement every tool possible to send the message to those dealers. You are not allowed in our community, and if you do this, you need to be held accountable and justice needs to be served, and that includes the death penalty, which is the ultimate justice tool.
But I think critics would say that more of the focus in this issue, this public health issue, is on the public health aspect as opposed to trying to legislate laws and impose stricter penalties on dealers. What kind of focus have you taken in terms of the public health aspect and treatment centers and that kind of stuff?
Well, that's where we fully support it, and this is another piece of bipartisan legislation that we were part of in order to get signed into law. On July 22nd of last year, President Obama signed in the opioid bill. That provided additional resources, millions of dollars to treatment providers, to our education and prevention awareness components that are out there. So to me, it's not a one-size-fits-all type of solution. This is a multi-pronged approach to the issue to really get the resources where they need to be. And we've demonstrated that with our support of the July 22nd bill that the President signed into law. And then also when we got the funding question at the end of this year, we put additional resources into the opioid heroin crisis that's here. So to me, this is a multi-prong that we've demonstrated a commitment to. And to the critics who say that law enforcement shouldn't be a component of it, I disagree with that. These open injection sites, this kind of let's just make it all legal. Yeah, you can make it all legal and I guess there would be no crime, but you're going to have a real public health crisis on your hand because kids are dying in our communities.
Okay, I want to talk about something that is concerning all Americans, and that's national security, what's going on in the Middle East with ISIS. What's your stance on how you think we can ultimately defeat ISIS and really improve relations in the Middle East?
Well, I think you first have to come at this with eyes wide open. You need the entire country to understand the threat. And by that, what you need to do, in my opinion, is first define the threat. And not be afraid to call it what it is. It's radical Islamic terrorism. It is not all Muslim. It's not all of a religion. It is a radicalized jihadist movement that is of a mindset that none of us can comprehend. None of us can think that the Quran and the Muslim religion is interpreted in such a way that these jihadists are interpreting it. To me, that's the first step. And then what we have to do is make sure that our military resources have the resources available, and in our intelligence community in particular, to identify the threats as proactively as possible in order to take them on over there. But now we're starting to see these threats with these lone wolf attacks and things starting to happen on our American soil. And that's why the issue of the border is a critical issue, not just because of immigration and the need for immigration reform, but also because of our national security concerns. And if you have refugees coming in by the tens of thousands, and we don't know who they are, and we don't have a system that's working, that is a real risk and a real threat. That tells me the border is not functioning the way that I envision it. I want a border that allows people to come to America. Our diversity has made us great for generations. We are all the sons and daughters of immigrants. But we need a border that works. We need a border that puts our American security first and foremost, our national security of our fellow American citizens as the top priority. And so, though we may not have seen that born and raised terrorists coming through in the refugee status, shame on us if it takes, if we had only done this after a horrific situation has occurred, another 9/11, another horrendous attack that comes to be. That to me is the classic DC type of approach to issues. Wait till the horrific event happens and then we'll claim, well, we'll do it better, we'll make sure it never happens again. Right now we know the threat is there. We know the threat is real. And all you got to do is look at the border and border situation with 11 to 12 million illegal immigrants here now. Let's not exacerbate the problem. Let's not wait till it happens in order to fix it. Let's be more proactive than that because the security of our American and fellow American citizens rest upon it.
Congressman Reed, I want to thank you for the time. Unfortunately, we're out of it, but I want to give you a chance to plug the website where people can learn more about where you stand.
Well, I just really appreciate people coming to Tom Reed for Congress.com, Tom Reed, R-E-E-D, for Congress.com, and love to have your support, gather information. We really appreciate the opportunity to be on.
Thanks for the time. Best of luck on Election Day.
Thank you so much.
And that does it for On the Record. You can find this full episode and our episode featuring the local candidates for New York State Senate, Tom O'Mara and Leslie Danks Burke, on YouTube. Just search On the Record Election 2016. I'm Ross DiMattei. Thanks for watching.
On the Record, Election 2016, presented by WENY News.